Everybody, a round of applause for Walter Williams.
Yeah. Happy Earth Day, everybody, and I really bring fantastic news today. The wetlands are saved, and New Orleans is saved, and so we can just pack up the tent and go home. So, can you help with those guidelines? Oh, you want more specifics about it? So you have 30 minutes? I'll try to cram it all in, okay? And anyway, actually, I'd like to make this interactive, so as I'm going along, if you have a question or something to add, or you think I'm just making up crazy stuff, and just Twitter me, and then I've got my I'll tweet you back, and or you can just hold up your hand, and I'll say yeah, and you'll tell me what you had to say, like the old-fashioned way. But anyway, as I'm sorry, Cindy says, I am from New Orleans, and so let me just go back to my involvement and why I'm here in the wetlands, because it makes no sense to most people that why Mr. Bill in the wetlands, whereas it does make sense. Mr. Bill's very vulnerable, and so are our wetlands. But I grew up here in Uptown, and I remember walking along the levee and seeing like the river was up here, and the roofs of our neighborhood was like down here. So I was realizing we're surrounded by a lot of water here, and I never left without this long bamboo reed I would carry around as a breathing tube. No, I didn't do that. But and I remember as a kid, my friends' parents took us to Grand Isle for a big trip, and we went there, and then the next year, oh great, we're going to go back to this camp in Grand Isle. So we went back, and the camp was like about a block in the Gulf, and I'm thinking, what kind of practical joke is this? Is this like some frat? When I realized the house didn't move, it was like the coast had come inland, so all of a sudden, yeah, I connects occasionally. And then Hurricane Betsy was the other big thing. And I was a kid, you may have heard about this one, and but back then they didn't even talk about the word evacuation, because it was a bad wind and bad storms, but we didn't flood here. It flooded out east, but there's really no reason to evacuate. Well, and now all of a sudden we have to evacuate. You really do have to leave. And so I'm trying to figure out how we got here when we had a nice, generally safe environment in New Orleans for hundreds of years, because they wouldn't have built the cathedral or the U.S. Mint or the federal, the customs house on the beach. Now we're on the beach, and so I'm trying to figure out, well, where did all of our land go? So we go back so anyway, I went to New York and did Mr. Bill, and lived in New York and L.A. And a few years ago, I really wanted to get into doing documentary film work for some reason. I couldn't explain it. It's kind of a fun process. You shoot some as you go along, you learn about it, and you don't have to write a script and deal with these really unsavory types. They're called studio executives. In documentary, you just make it. And so I came back to New Orleans, and I wanted to do something about New Orleans. It's my hometown, and I figured it'd be all kinds of interesting things, the music, the culture. And I started filming here in 2000, and for some reason I got into this whole wetlands thing. I mean, it was not my plan, but the more I thought about why the city was here, because I grew up here, and it wasn't because of the weather. They didn't put it here. I mean, my favorite place in the summer was Woolworth's, because they had air conditioning, and so there had to be some other reason to put this city here. It's because it's a big connecting point of the ocean and the river. It's like the old world, the new world, and everything came through New Orleans. And so we, by purpose, we have to be near the water. They don't put ports up in the mountains. But now we're at the edge. And for hundreds of years, it worked. It was a very successful community. It grew, we overgrew. But suddenly we're here facing total annihilation every single summer, and I think that can be changed. And so I started making this documentary. I finished it. It's called New Orleans: The Natural History. It's a 1-hour documentary. It kind of explains how this whole area evolved just within the last few thousand years, from the building up of the river. And Lake Pontchartrain didn't even exist until like 2,500 years ago. It was all open water, but now with land and then a successful city and port. And so to get back to that, we can once again use the same river that built it to begin with. So the good news is that we do have like one of the biggest land building machines on the planet, and it's called the Mississippi River, and it's what built us in the first place, and it's what can rebuild the land. The second part of the good news is that Most scientists agree that between 40 and 90% of our wetlands loss is due to oil and gas activities. These canals that are dug through our wetlands, is like 10,000 miles at least of these canals. They allow the salt water to come inland, kill the freshwater plants that have been holding it all together for all these, centuries. And the storm comes in, there's nothing holding the land together, so it washes away, and all of a sudden there's no land. And these canals have, really exacerbated it. It's a good analogy. It's like we're just kind of sinking a little bit, but it's like if you take a big chunk of ice a big ice block out of the freezer, it will gradually melt, and that's what subsidence is. But if you start chopping it up with an ice pick, it's going to obviously more quickly dissolve, and that's kind of what's happened to the wetlands. So the good news is not like some corporation or company went out of business and left us with this huge, gigantic mess with nothing to do about it. No, it's the biggest financial enterprise on the planet, the oil industry, that are the ones who profited from us, and they also have the money to fix the problem. They're proven scientifically that this activity has caused this destruction, and these things were predicted in the 60s. So the government funded the Army Corps of Engineers environmental impact study to see what this activity of all these canals were going to do to southern Louisiana, and they all say, yep, it's going to cause irretrievable land loss. Also, that pulling that oil from underneath us, it made a gigantic cavity, and then everything just sunk on top of that. So within 50 years, all of a sudden, we've lost all of our protection, and the river's been leveed for hundreds of years, since the first year. But everything was fine up until about 50 years ago. There was never a concern about the ocean coming here. And y'all watch Gustav. Did you see that TV show, the Gustav show, where the water is it's like a Godzilla film, and there's this little thin wall and the ocean's coming over, and that's not how it's supposed to be. And so the plan is how do you get the people responsible for at least half of it, to pay their fair share. And that's my mission now, is to do that. And I can't do anything else but kind of concentrate on it, because I don't want to wake up some morning with no New Orleans here, as I don't know where else to go. I was sitting in Dallas watching the waves come over, and there really is, once you get used to New Orleans, you're not going to find another place like it. So I think we can save the place, and so I think things can change. You don't remember, but when I was a kid, there was a big campaign, because people used to throw their garbage out of their cars. It was just well, here in New Orleans they still do, okay, but generally around the country it was just a common thing, you throw your garbage out. So they came up with this campaign with a Native American, and he's by a stream, and all of a sudden a car comes by and they throw the garbage out, and this Native American has a tear come down his eye. And they ran this on TV quite a bit, and before you knew it, no one was throwing their garbage out in front of Native Americans. It's really tough to see a grown Indian cry, and but it works. You can make films. So I'm so lucky to use my background in filmmaking. I've been doing comedy films and working in TV, but now I can do something that actually possibly can make a difference, because I know there's a solution there. We have the river. We just need the money and the will to take that mud. All these floods that are happening now, and last summer, that was a huge amount of land that came floating right by us. Right now we have it all channeled where it just dumps off the mouth of the Mississippi, where the continental shelf is, and it just goes off in the open water. If we just released our levees below us, that land would actually spread out, and in really literally no time we're going to be building up mud. I mean, a levee is like a little bitty mound of mud like this, whereas the wetlands is just like tens of thousands more volume. It's like, I'm going to go back in the past again. In the 70s, everyone had green shag carpet. Anybody? And that stuff could absorb anything. I mean, really, red wine, gumbo, bong water, oops, I'm sorry. But we didn't save all this. If we'd put all that green shag carpet out there, it's like it's like the wetlands. It absorbs, like this gigantic sponge absorbing the seawater. But we didn't save it. It was green too, and so it wouldn't have looked that bad. But so how do we do? But the thing is, people are now educated. When I started doing this in 2000, I could not explain to anybody why I was doing this. And, oh, that's a good thing you're doing, but why? Well, it's not an environmental thing. I mean, I am an environmentalist, I believe in that, but this isn't really about an environmental issue. It's about the actual destruction of one of the great cities of the world. And this is, you know, and the other, here's some more good news about, okay, so got the oil, okay, got the river, got the oil industry. Now they're saying, hey, look, we paid royalties, and look, we built roads in Louisiana, you know, from the royalties you made off of the oil. Well, you know, I mean, roads are good, but if they're like underwater, it doesn't really serve a lot of purpose. You know, the fish don't really need a road, and I mean, maybe the flooding would be good for tourism. You know, you have submarine tours down Bourbon Street. You know, the girls' legs with at the strip club with barnacles on it. But I don't want to live that way. You know, I live on Royal Street. I don't want to be wearing a snorkel on my balcony on the second floor. So, you know, I like that New Orleans is turning green. You know, this is great. But I just don't want it to turn blue. You know, like the ocean. So anyway. Back to the other good news. All right. So the oil industry can say, look, well, we were abiding by all these laws back then. We didn't do anything wrong. Well, the same thing holds true for the chemical industry with Love Canal. Is anyone here Love Canal? It was a disaster. It was a community that was built on a toxic waste dump, and every other house had two-headed babies. I don't mean to offend you, but it was a lot of, you know, birth defects. And so the Hooker Chemical, which eventually then left there and came down here, you know, they were forced, even though they said they were abiding by the law, the government signed an executive order, Congress passed a law saying, well, we don't care that you were abiding by the laws at the time, you caused this damage. So you have to go back and clean up this damage and these canals, and that created the Superfund. And anyone hear about the Superfund? Well, that's it's a government-mandated taxing of the chemical industry to clean up their past damage to the environment, even though when they did it, they were supposedly abiding by the law. Okay, so that's a legal precedent, the Superfund we all know about. The oil industry, this was all predicted by our own government-supported investigation by the Corps of Engineers, that this was all going to happen. That it all has come true. It has happened, and they've made incredible profits. I mean, they have more money than like Montezuma or the Pharaohs or anybody, and so it's not like they don't have the money. They're still profiting off of us, and they're making us have to face another summer having to leave your house and thinking I may never see my home again. No one else has to live under that kind of pressure in America. I mean, in LA, you got to worry 24/7, I guess. If you go to see a movie and you're parking your car at the wrong time, oops, you know, oh.
It'll stay there.
It'll stay there. A little excitement. So you come to see Mr. Bill, and right,
always in peril.
Always, right. Oh, yeah. Speaking of hurricanes, okay, I do have a top 10. Yeah, we are getting close there. The Jazz Fest is about to. Everyone has a great time at the Jazz Fest, and then all of a sudden, after Jazz Fest, everyone goes, "Oh, here we go again." You know. So, I decided to just for everyone's safety to have a top 10 list of things to prepare for. Now, this is serious. These aren't necessarily funny, but let's see. Number one. And you know this, you don't stock up on a lot of frozen shrimp for your freezer right now. You know? Wait till November, really. It's not a good idea, right? Number two, get to know people in high places. You know, like Folsom, Gonzales, Monroe, I mean, any place above sea level, right? I didn't say these are funny. I was like, number three, take up laminating, you know, as a hobby. You know, you can hone your craft. You laminate family photos, deeds, insurance policies, incriminating letters from your spouse or significant other. Number four, stock an emergency kit. You got to have an emergency kit anytime you leave New Orleans. Red beans, CDM coffee, crab oil, Dr. John anthology, that kind of stuff. Number five, you want to find an affordable motel which takes pets in an isolated area, has a real kindly manager, but it's not called the Bates Motel. It's like, That's an old movie. 6, okay, if you're evacuating out of the state, you have to have a slip cover for your license plate of any other state of the union, because we kind of overdid our welcome after Katrina. And if you got Louisiana, you just, no, we don't have any rooms. Right? You're going to stay here forever, aren't you? Right? Number 7, now if you do opt for a vertical evacuation, use a plane, not a building, okay? Number 8, contract SDT, okay? To install these dispensers of that magic formula they use in the French Quarter, just put them all around the city. So when the levees do overtop, that toxic muck is going to have a nice lemony fresh smell to it. Right? Number 9, and okay, if you're like one of these people that there's no way I'm leaving, and one of those people, just no way ever, and you also just happen to be planning to get a tattoo, make it something like your social security number, your next of kin, something like that. And number 10, just enjoy living in one of the greatest places you can live, because you're well prepared. The thing is, you don't have to, die in I would be very embarrassed to die in a hurricane. If they're making these movies and all, what a schmuck. Because you have all this warning. It's like there's absolutely no reason to die. But it's still frustrating to think you have to leave. And I can see, back to the days when I grew up, not even hearing about the word evacuation. And I want to make one more point about that Betsy experience. Okay, Hurricane Betsy, now that we look back, was a much more powerful storm than Katrina when it hit land. It was basically a 4. It hit us in the worst. I don't even know much about hurricanes, but if you're on the eastern side of the hurricane, that's where all the flooding and surge is. So it hit us right slightly to the west. So we were in the worst case place. So Betsy hit us in the worst place to the maximum amount of surge, a more powerful hurricane than Katrina, yet there was no flooding from the 17th Street Canal or the London Canal or the Orleans, no flooding at all back then. And not only that, they had no seawalls on the canals whatsoever. It was just it was canals with dirt, but no flooding. Only 40 years ago. And now Katrina, a less powerful storm, goes off to the east, so we're on the easy side, less surge. But these canals that have now 12-foot seawalls are breaking and flooding. So now what's happened differently in 40 years that's allowed this? And to simply blame it on the Corps of Engineers is, it's because they didn't drive the pilings deep enough. That's all. We didn't even need walls whatsoever 40 years ago. So it's the natural protection of the wetlands. It's the only answer to save New Orleans. Everything else is a backseat, crime and all. I mean, you're not going to have any criminals or victims if you have the ocean come pouring through. You're not going to have bad schools. You're not going to have bad hospitals. You're not going to have anything, because it's over, and Katrina was not a direct hit. Was not the big one. That was a little spanking. It breached some seawalls. If you overtop the levee, which is what everyone is concerned about, other than George Bush at the time, who said, well, no one could have predicted this. I mean, Mary Landrieu actually went on the floor of the Senate and said, what do you mean no one could have predicted this? Even Mr. Bill predicted this. She was stating a little public service announcement I did before Shell co-opted the America's Wetland campaign and made it more of an industry-biased campaign, because basically their whole message is that it's all the Corps of Engineers' fault, it's all the levee's fault, so the American taxpayer has to fix this problem. Well, it's not. At least half of the damage occurred by private industry. So if I was a citizen from anywhere else in the country saying, okay, and now they have committed to wetlands restoration. The new Corps of Engineers directive by Obama is to incorporate infrastructure design into environmentally wetland. So they realize, yes, we need wetlands. In fact, 90% of the people in Louisiana polled now agree we all need wetlands. So I think that's a big step forward from when I started. I mean, 90% of the people don't agree on anything. 90% of the people don't agree it's not right to drown orphans. I'm personally against it, but little drowned orphans, okay. But I really think it's the time has come to show express yourself that we're not going to stand for this. We're not going to put our heads under the ground because the oil industry is going to threaten to leave us, and they're this big, great industry, and the big oil, the glory days of the oil boom. I mean, there's no money they can pay us that, you know, compensates for losing this whole city and losing your home. I mean, there's just nothing they can pay us. So until they step up and do the right thing, and they have the money to do it, I'm going to keep making movies about it. We staged a protest at One Shell Square with Mr. Bill. We gave him a giant bill, Mr. Bill's entourage. We went there, presented Shell the bill. We flew a plane last Jazz Fest. I don't know if anyone was there last Jazz Fest, but we had a plane going around saying, "Shell, hear the music, fix the coast you broke." So they got this big, they got their flags like they're the good guys putting on this wonderful festival for us. So they spend a little PR money to look like the good guy, greenwashing with America's wetland. Meanwhile, they've caused trillions of dollars of damage, because believe me, if we'd had the amount of wetlands we had at the time of Betsy, without the interference of the oil industry, we would have had no damage in New Orleans. Those seawalls would have held up. There would have been no flooding of the city, no displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, no loss of thousands of lives, no mental anguish and post-traumatic stress disorder. You start adding up all those costs, you're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars just from a financial standpoint, which the oil industry could be said, you're responsible. This would not have happened if the wetlands had been the way they have been in the past, and they would have naturally absorbed that ocean surge, and those walls wouldn't have broken, and it would have been a wind damage, but it would not have been the catastrophic event. You're going to have to pay the whole bill. So my message to the oil industry, and it's the only logical conclusion for them to make, is they should do the right thing, take the first step, be the good guys, accept no blame. I don't care if they don't have to accept any blame, but make a contribution to help restore the place that they're doing business in and do the right thing. Meanwhile, try to cut their liability down, you know, with the state, which I'm sure our governor will be happy to do, and look like the good guys. And meanwhile, they protect their own infrastructure, because they have a ticking time bomb on their hands, because not only do the wetlands protect New Orleans and southern Louisiana, they protect their whole oil pipelines. They got pipes sitting out in the ocean now being battered by waves that used to be underground, and they're not meant to withstand this. So they're going to start breaking and filling the Gulf of Mexico with the strategic oil reserve. Who knows? But that's the kind of risk that they're facing by not doing something quickly. And they don't want to do something and get the whole blame for everything, so they should just do the right thing, cut their liability, and put up a contribution which equates to about half the thing. Yeah? Okay. So that's I tell you, right, that the wetlands are saved and New Orleans is saved. The river, the oil money, and legal precedent with Superfunds. So you get, okay, go ahead.
What kind of time frame are we looking at? I mean, if everybody can jump on this project to get it back up to 100%.
Well, there are various ways to use the river. There's a lot of smaller diversions, which take a lot of engineering. There's also a more radical approach, which I think, you know, it sounds extreme, but there's not a lot of people south of us now around Plaquemine. There's a lot of oil workers and stuff, but most people have lost it because they're in the water. There's really no land. So we relocate some people, make them millionaires. There's not a lot of people. Put some little levees around strategic refineries, and then we let the river go, the levees, actually destroy the levees to a big degree south of New Orleans. That mud's going to spread out. So we're on a shallow shelf here, you know, between here and the mouth of the river. That's where the mud can collect. So all this flooding from the Midwest, this land is pouring down out off the shelf. If we actually capture the full amount of silt that's available to us, it's all speculative, but in my mind, I can see 5-10 years of getting significant mud accumulations here, which is far more mud than a piled up levee, you know. So, but the main thing is like, there's a plan to do something. Right now, there's no plan to do anything. Everyone agrees, yeah, we got to save the wetlands. Okay, how are you going to pay for it? You know, we know we're in a depression or, you know, serious times economically, so we can't count on the American taxpayer to pay 100% of a bill of coastal restoration when half of the damage was done by the oil industry. So if we get that commitment of the oil money, here's the plan to divert the river. Everyone knows, okay, we're going to risk 10 years that maybe we'll be okay, because it was 40 years between Betsy and Katrina. So we got a 40-year, we can't count on 40 years, but we did get 40 years. If we get 10 years or 15 years and this is happening and mud is doing 24/7, we're building the land, you put some plants in there, we've got wetlands happening, and wetlands grow with the ocean level. You don't need solid land. They come above the water and they're effective in that way. So if we get that commitment, then insurance rates will come down. Insurers will be willing to insure us again. I wouldn't insure us if I was an insurance company with every year we're facing this kind of disaster. But if they know there's a plan in place, the money's committed, the mud's happening, then people will start being insured again. You'll have investments coming back, and Trump's going to build that stupid building and all. But the main thing is we get to stay here, and the culture of New Orleans continues, and all these new innovations that have come out of the past, like jazz and Creole cuisine, that the whole world gets to benefit from. Who knows what future innovations you guys are going to come up with that hadn't even happened yet. So that alone is worth protecting, this unique kind of, I mean, Mr. Bill came from here, you know, it's like, if I'd done this anywhere else, they would have had me, you know, taken off, you know, so they let you do your thing here. So, any more questions? They're going to shoot the little dart and I pass out soon, but do you have any more questions or comments? Or think I'm blowing smoke?
Bill now.
What's that?
Where can people see Mr. Bill now?
Oh, you can see them all over the internet. I just did a couple of national campaigns, one for MasterCard and Subway, which have been running all year, and you can see him on wherever. And yeah, the nice thing is I get to use Mr. Bill. I did these public service announcements, but I don't, you know, I do certain selective things, but it's a nice thing owning a character people love, because that can translate into causes that I'm interested in, like preserving the wetlands, rather than putting it on slot machines like the other Saturday Night Live characters, because I own mine and I don't have to. I can do what I want with it. It's my own ball and I can do what I want with it. So go create things too, and use whatever you. See, I'm using my filmmaking background to do something, you know, so right now as an artist is like the easiest time I've had, because I don't have to figure out what to do. You know, it's telling, I mean, I have no choice but to do this, because, you know, as I said, I don't want to wake up New Orleans. So Mr. Bill will be around. You can see him all over the internet, you know, or whatever. So thank you.